otherwise they'd be potentially facing criminal sanctions. Now, the limit is £5,000 in England. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, it's down to £2,500. And remember, this is over the course of a year. So if a local charity in Northern Ireland wants to just pay for a few people to come down to London to attend a rally or something, they're being caught. And then, obviously, yes, because you'd be campaigning just within one constituency. And I can imagine a campaign to save children's centres could be something that got quite a few people involved. You know, but you'd be working in coalition with other organisations, and all their spending would be being counted as well. You've got a cap on what you're allowed to spend at £10,000 as well, so there's that constituency limit as well. The second question about what is this for? I think that's one for Neil, really, isn't it?
The question about whether you...
I'm sorry, could the speakers please stand up?
Oh, sorry. Just juggling my notes, oh dear. Okay, so the question about what it's for...
Sorry, I didn't say what it's for. I said, why is the government supporting an act?
Okay, sorry, I dropped the note of your question.
No, I wouldn't mind you all answering it. Why do you think the government is supporting an act which is totally unclear in the second part of it?
Because they can't win a clean election.
Personally, I think it's because ministers want a quiet life. And I think... And seriously, I mean, you know, here's Neil giving it, you know, he's not having an easy evening. And you can see why MPs... You can see why ministers would want a quiet life to stop and to block democratic campaigning. And I think it's really misguided. I think it's just gone far too far. In terms of what you do if you're at a children's centre and want to campaign against cuts to children's centre, there is a bit of small print in the Electoral Commission. And I suggest you can download this from the Electoral Commission website. So if you're campaigning on a policy issue which is subsequently adopted, it can be okay if you have a long-established record of campaigning on the issue to further your charitable purposes. So for goodness sake, get started now, before the election. And then, if one of the parties adopts your policy or comes out against it just before the election, it's okay so long as you don't change anything. If you say, Neil's supporting us, or whatever, you're dead, you're toast. Then you've got to, sorry, I exaggerate, you're not dead. But you're then regulated and you have to register. Or you might have to. The Electoral Commission's not clear. And you will be okay for about 40% of the year. 60% of the year. These bills only count for about 40% of the year because they're for the year.
40% of the time.
40% of the time is either a year before an election, or a year before a local election, or a year before an EU election. So 60% of the time you're quite okay. You can just do your normal charitable stuff.
That's only when it matters.
When it
matters.
Could I pass this on to Neil to go on to now?
Right, well, thank you very much. I'm glad you all appreciated my presence. Thank you, I'll keep coming. There are 2 points I want to make. One is, those of you who've ever stood for Parliament will know that actually your money is very strictly controlled, and what you are allowed to do with that money is also strictly controlled. So, for example, we get a certain amount which we're allowed to spend. I think it's about 40,000.
Answer the questions.
I am doing. I'm just trying to get this point across to you. So we're allowed to spend about £14,000 on our campaign, and we have to make sure that every leaflet we produce is properly justified and checked with legal conditions that are prescribed by legislation. So that is the campaign we're allowed to have, and so it is therefore got a ceiling of expenditure. And on top of that, we've got ceilings of expenditure for political parties up to for the period before a campaign as well. So it is properly transparent. So what we're saying is there's a certain amount of money you're allowed to spend in total, and there's a certain amount of money you're allowed to spend in a constituency. This legislation attempts to make sure that that's what happens, so that other organisations can't come along with another lot of money and promote a party or a candidate in addition to what has already been prescribed for that party or candidate to have. So the question that you've been asking is what is this legislation for? It is to stop more money coming in, more campaigning coming in for a specific party or a specific candidate. Now, you may disagree with that objective, and you may think that it is not appropriate to do it in this way. But that is the reason, so I'm giving you that answer. But you may not agree with it, but that is the position. Now, I want to come back to this business about what you can campaign for and what you can't campaign for. You can and should campaign for the objectives of your charity. And if that is getting more grants, then say so. But what you can't do is campaign for a specific candidate or party. And that's the difference. And so the definition basically boils down to what the Electoral Commission thinks is controlled expenditure, and what clearly also by definition will be uncontrolled expenditure. And I think that this is where either we need to tighten up the legislation to make it clearer, or make sure that we have some way of getting it across what is actually allowed, what is permissible, and what isn't.
It's not where
Just on that,
It's not where
just on that, Neil, perhaps if I could follow that up with something. Is it not possible that there are many cases where a policy, yes, a local policy specifically, is so intertwined with one candidate that even though the people campaigning for it, say it's a local hospital, may well not have anything to do with that candidate at all, because that candidate perhaps came from another group in that coalition of charities all campaigning for the hospital, that candidate's name is so much enmeshed with that campaign that the campaign is just, the campaign can't work. Does that not, can't you think of a situation where that would be the case?
I think the thing that we've got to bear in mind here is that this is about finding out where money goes. It's not actually about the campaign or messaging. So if somebody is well known for one political position, or indeed has been engaged in a campaign throughout his or her political life, and is therefore constantly associated with, say, green politics or prison reform, then by definition that person is going to have a reputation. Clearly that's the case. But if the prison reform organisation said, we're going to vote for Neil Carmichael because he's the man who looks after prison reform, and started campaigning for me Pacifically, then they'd be making a financial contribution to my campaign, which would actually mean that we had exceeded the amount of money we should be spending, and that is therefore controlled expenditure.
But that doesn't cover those clauses, though.
Can we, there's clearly a difference of opinion on this. Can we take another couple of questions? Can we take the lady there with the glasses?
Hi, I'm just a local student. There seems to be a very specific kind of division on a very specific point, which is near saying that if you specifically mention party or candidate, then you'll be stopped. Your spending will be capped. And then it seems that the majority of other people here are saying that if you have any policy that is somehow related to what the government is thinking about, because the government is thinking about what the majority of people in the country are thinking about, you will be stopped.
Yes.
Can you prove that they won't be?
That is the issue on which there are lawyers fighting on both sides. There are lawyers arguing on both sides. The government has had legal advice which it has not made available. David can say more about this.
It's very transparent.
Yeah, I feel a bit sorry for Neil here because he's having to defend a definition which I don't think is in line with what he says what he wants to happen. I believe that him when he says that this stuff shouldn't be regulated. But not only that, it's a definition that was brought in by Tony Blair, and I can't imagine it's particularly comfortable either to be defending something that the Labour Prime Minister did. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with our illustrious chair about the idea that lawyers are battling this out, because you described a situation where lots of people here are saying one thing and Neil's disagreeing. Lots of people everywhere else are saying one thing. We certainly at 38 Degrees have not been able to find a lawyer who will back up the government position. The government says it's had legal advice confirming its position, but I mean, I've mentioned Tony Blair already. I think we've got reasons to be a bit nervous when the government says it's got legal advice that says everything's above board, but it won't have to sleep. Most importantly of all, though, I think in this case, is the view of the Electoral Commission, because the Electoral Commission are the body that enforce the law, and the Electoral Commission, and read out their briefing, and they list a range of circumstances in which charities campaigning on policy issues, not telling people who to vote for, but just saying where each of the candidates stands on their policy issue, or campaigning for an issue that matters to them, will be caught. 38 Degrees members standing up for the NHS and talking about campaigning against hospital privatisation or hospital closures will be caught. Now, if the definition did what Neil says it does, and was singling out people who were specifically seeking as their primary intention to get someone elected, then of course there should be limits, of course there should be transparency, of course there should be regulation. But Neil's clapping a law that doesn't exist at the moment. That's the point. That's not what he voted for.
What Neil's describing is what many people who first come in as a trustee of a charity think the law says about campaigning, which is you can do anything, but you mustn't campaign for a particular party. And it's certainly true. You can't, as a charity, campaign for a particular candidate or political party. But actually, it's much tighter than that. It's not true that any policy issue that you want to talk about will be blocked by this new law. I mean, it's not that black and white either. And so, it's this horrible grey area in the middle. And so, to give a very concrete, real example, stop climate chaos in I grew in Cambridge, our local constituency. Before the meeting, we had sort of like Hustings. We had a question time. We got the 4 main MPs in our constituency to come and ask questions on climate change, we were really meticulous. We got 4 main candidates, absolutely equal time, really impartial chair, and we wanted to publicise the picture of the 4 panellists and the chair sitting there asking questions. But because one of the candidates left, it was actually the Labour Party chap, left before our photographer got his act together, we were just a small local charity, we couldn't publicise it, because that would have been seen as, I don't know, denigrating the Labour Party guy, because he wasn't in the photo. I think he had another engagement. I don't think it was deliberate, but it could have been. So that's the degree to which it sort of kind of restricts you. And because of this stuff is deeply complicated stuff, it's really scary and chilling. And lots of us are volunteer trustees of little charities and community groups. You say, life's too short, we'll just cut it.
Can I just take one more question, Ivan, because time is going on. We do want the panellists to be able to say a bit at the end, you see. So that's why I'm only taking one more question. Can I take it from... Sorry, this is terrible. Choosing. Can I take it from the gentleman there?
At the end of that 1992 election, the Sun said it was a somewhat monetary effect. Will this legislation restrict the spending of something like the Sun in having such a big effect on elections?
And will it affect bloggers? Will it affect bloggers?
I asked exactly this question of the policy of a woman called Kate Engel, who's the policy team of the Electoral Commission. The media are exempt from the Act. But it is unclear precisely what counts as media. Because I said, well, as a charity, could we call ourselves media? And she said, well, oh, she never thought of that one. The law refers to the publication of any material relating to an election. So the exempt, newspapers and periodicals are exempt, except for adverts. And that includes electronic versions, like websites. But they're very unclear what happens about bloggers, because they weren't invented when the law was written. So the somewhat one is completely exempt. So immigration, EU, climate change.
Why is that? Why are the media? Why are the banks?
I don't think anybody would want to restrict the ability of the press to comment.
Influence people more than anybody else. Why are they exempt?
Well, I don't think anybody would want to restrict the right of the press to comment on an election. And much as I dislike what some of the press may say about some of my pet hobby horses, I think freedom of speech is really important. I just want charities and civil society to be able to have that same right.
Turn that round then and say, should the media be exempt, and who else should be exempt or should not be exempt?
Well, obviously the media shouldn't be part of this because we want a free press, and it's really important to make that point. The last thing we want to be doing is restricting the press. We've already got enough trouble. With the plans to deal with some of the issues that have cropped up in the last few years in connection with press conduct. But what we do not want to do, and what we should never even contemplate, is restricting the press, because our democracy does rely absolutely on a free press. So it's really important that we allow the press to basically say what it wants, within reason, of course, and those reasons have been discussed in detail in the House of Commons as well, but they're a separate piece of legislation. So I'm absolutely clear about that. A free press is absolutely.
But they don't report all the news. That's the problem.
Well, that's you have to buy different things.
Where's my freedom?
Well, your freedom
I
is.
haven't got any freedom. Your own freedom. To what everybody says about it. There's nothing I can say without somebody chopping my head off.
Well, I don't think that's correct.
Well,
to be honest, I don't know whether I haven't met you. I don't think so. I don't know why anyone would possibly want to chop your head off, but certainly not me. It's really important we understand, or at least recognise the value of having a free democratic society which incorporates a free press, but which is also able to make sure that we have elections which are free in the sense of their conduct, not in the sense of their cost, but actually monitored so that one political party can't gain an advantage over another political party because of monies coming in from sources which are unaccountable and untransparent.
Neil, where's the evidence that these small charities are lining pockets of Labour, Tory, Liberal groups? Where's the actual evidence?
On very small organisations, particularly small firms, I think also small charities, they've actually been sort of removed from some of these rules, because the point you've just made is a perfectly valid one. And that's why one of the amendments did that, and it demonstrates that this government listens and when it hears something sensible, it acts. So I'm not going to take all that cheering as evidence that you're agreeing with me, but what I am going to say is this: I've listened very carefully to what you said, and I have taken notes, and I can see there are three issues which you're worried about, and one of them is this definition between what you think is a party political activity and what you might think is a campaigning activity. There is a distinction, and I think that it will be necessary for the Electoral Commission and other organisations associated with this legislation to clarify.
They already have.
Well, obviously not well enough because we're having a debate.
Changing definitions.
So he said something there.
Do you support the amendment then? David Drew. Support many amendments. Do you support the amendment? Yes.
David.
Make a quick point. Stand up.
Yes, stand up.
Just a couple of quick points. I mean, one of the last things, and I know I was regularly in different lobbies, but one of the best things the last government did was to introduce pre-legislative scrutiny. Now, why did this not go through proper pre-legislative scrutiny when a lot of the groups could have really had their point of view put across? That's one point. The second point is, and I know we've not spent a lot of time on it, but the trade union administration part I see as a real threat. No, I'm a Labour politician. I take money from the trade unions. I make no apology for that. But you've just received £5,000 from United and Cecil, a private dining club. Yeah. Why is it that trade unionists have to actually now be registered and certificated to say what they want to do with their money, but I can't know where your money came from? That's just as much lobbying as it is the trade unions.
Scrutiny is a really good idea, and I've participated in that on lots of legislation. And largely it's because we want to, funnily enough, hear the views of charities, hear the views of organisations. A good example was legislative scrutiny we did prior to the Children and Families legislation, which we think is important. And so we actually sat listening in some detail to issues. And I think that we improved the legislation as a result, because I actually was on that committee that did that scrutiny.
What about this?
No
white paper, no green paper.
This bill, this bill has actually been debated really quite a lot. We actually did say we would introduce legislation at the last general election to deal with lobbying, because we were concerned about transparency. And that's exactly what we have done. And as I pointed out in my opening remarks, we said that it was important that this was transparent, that it was carefully considered, and the main complaint that we got was, whilst we were considering it, we were told we were being too late in introducing it. And I've got more people complaining about the fact we didn't introduce it than I've got complaining about the quality of it. Now, David mentioned a question about the trade union movement. David mentioned a question about trade union movement and the question of and membership. I think it's perfectly reasonable for membership to be effectively subject to some degree of scrutiny. But the legislation is very specific on this point. It does not prescribe how that should be done. It leaves the union to do it itself. And I think that's perfectly reasonable, because all organisations should be able to do things themselves. As for donations to political parties or individuals, that is listed, and
who's it from, Neil? Who are United?
Well, it's a dining club called the United and Cecil Club. Yeah, I think it donated back in just a load of people who like having dinners and approve of concern.
What about the food banks?
Well, I don't think they've donated any money to me. I've donated money to them.
How about giving that to a food bank?
I don't think that's got anything to do with this particular.
I think that 5,000 to be given to a food bank.
Well,
Are you going to give it to a food bank?
I think the point about this particular question is simply this. Whatever you think about where money comes from and who gets it and so on, it has to be transparent, and that's why these things are. And that's why these domestic matters should be properly declared.
Can I ask a really important question? I don't think it's the case that this bill will only actually affect 1% of lobbying.
That's to do with the first part of it.
Linton Crosby wouldn't be covered by the bill. That's what it is.
Yes.
So unless you are a specific lobbying firm, of which there are hardly any, you wouldn't be affected. You would be affected. The Association of Professional Political Consultants, and I trust them just on their name, say only 5% of lobbyists will be covered by the bill. So that's a nice...
That's a part of the bill.
No, Neil, that's the whole bill. That's the whole... A part of the bill which is solely concerned with lobbying, the professional consultants say only 5% will be covered. Linton Crosby, who works for the government and is well known to have lobbied on behalf of his own lobbying firm, is not covered by the bill. What? If you're a lobbyist who works... if you work for BP, and you're a lobbyist who works for BP, is employed by BP, you are not covered by the bill. The revolving door is not covered by the bill. This does not deal with lobbying at all.
Right, anyway, I've listened very carefully to some interesting points. You've got my answers, and I will actually seek to clarify some of the points that you made, because I'll stop and let you carry on tapping. I have come here with a deliberate intention to listen, because it is important that you know that happens. As I pointed out in the beginning of my remarks, this bill is in the House of Lords, but it's actually, as they say, paused for further reflection and consideration, because you have raised issues that I'd like to. I'll take one more question from that chap over there.
I think we've got enough time now.
Have we? I'm rather enjoying it.
Sorry.
Carmichael, the chairman has asked for the microphone on a number of occasions since I walked in 5 minutes ago, and you haven't respected her request. Please would you do that?
Right, well there you are.
Thank you. This is the end of it, and it's simply because we are running out of time. I wanted to have an opportunity to sum up the feeling in this room. It is clearly one of immense frustration and confusion. There is a lot of Actually, I think I beg to differ. It's confusion, if you'll let me finish, confusion around the precise detail of how this bill would affect particular charities. It's not confusion about the principles, it's confusion about whether this amendment would do this, or whether that bit would do this, or where that comma goes, or that dot goes. And legislation like this needs careful scrutiny. Somebody pointed that out earlier, that there is pre-legislative scrutiny, and this bill has been rushed through, and it has not received much of the scrutiny that it requires. The sense which I am very much getting from the room is that there is anger here, and it seems quite right that we ask the local MP to bring back the comments that we have made and to take them to his colleagues in government and to express the feeling of the people here in this constituency. There's a petition which is about this bill, which has received 190,000 signatures on it. More than 600, which at this moment come from this constituency of Stroud. I suspect that in the next few days that number will be growing. There are many things which this bill seeks to do, or looks to do, or those who have put forward this bill think that it should do. But the legislation which is before Parliament doesn't look like it actually does that. There's a difference between what it should do and what it actually does, what it would do, what it will do. And that is something we have to get absolutely right. You've said that you will take those comments back, you've said that you've been in listening mode, so thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask the other two panellists, because you've had quite the say already, I'm going to ask the other two panellists if they would just leave you with a few comments. So, first round, then to David, and David can also tell you what to do next and how to get further involved.
Okay, so improper, we all agree, I think, improper lobbying is the problem. But this bill ain't it. So it needs to be made fairer to civil society. And and that needs to be made fairer now. And after the 2015 election, it needs to be completely reworked, including, as Neil says, clarifying these definitions. I do suggest anybody who wants to get clear about the definitions goes to look on the Electoral Commission's website, which has got a really helpful briefing, which gives some very clear examples. So there is this completely legitimate concern about excessive corporate influence and lobbying, but this bill actually goes in the wrong direction. So it will scarcely affect most corporate lobbying, as we discussed. The media is exempt, somewhat won it, but the bureaucratic burden and the uncertainty is going to chill civil society's voice. And we haven't discussed it very much, but coalition campaigning is going to become virtually impossible because of the bureaucratic burden. But that